So, okay, so we're gonna do a quick demonstration here on how to trim your quilt. So we're now assuming that you've already quilted and you're ready to trim this, ready to put the binding on. So I usually start in the corner, and I start in the corner with my square ruler to sort of line that up in the corner to get a nice good corner here. If you don't have a square ruler, that's okay. You can use your straight ruler. Just line it up with one of your edges and then line that up as well and cut, right? So you want to get a nice 90-degree corner here. So I'm going to put my square ruler here, and I'm just going to start cutting. Sorry, that's the dogs are going to play in the background. So I just used that square ruler, didn't quite get that, to get that corner going. And then now that we've got that done, we're now going to use our straight ruler. So we're going to go ahead and just go for a best fit, follow this side. Sometimes you might find that, you're trimming off a little bit of fabric. Sometimes you're not. But you want to kind of get the edges straight as you can. Your binding will hide a lot of bumps and things like that. As you get closer to the other corner, you may want to go back to the square ruler if you have it, just to get that nice and neatly cut. And then that just starts us off at the next corner, and at this point I'm going to just turn it, and I'm just going to carry on, and I'm going to do the whole trim the whole quilt this way. Okay, I want to pan over. So we've trimmed everything to the edges of the quilt top. We're ready to put our binding on. So what you're going to do is you're going to cut 5 strips of your binding, remove your selvage edges, and I have cut mine at 2 inches. I've told you to cut yours at 2.5. I think for putting your binding on the first time, 2.5 is a lot easier. Eventually you might decide like me that you prefer to cut it a little bit narrower. So, but for now, definitely cut them at 2.5. Each one of these strips, what you're going to do is you're going to join them end to end, and we're going to join them on the bias, okay? So you're going to take your 2 strips, you're going to put them right sides together like this, and you're going to sew from that corner to that corner. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you a seam that's like that, okay? And that is going to fold better, okay, when we put it on the quilt. So let me just sew a couple of these together to show you. Right, so what I've done now is I have sewn all of these 5 binding strips end to end. So each one, if you look really closely here, you can just see that just stitched a diagonal line from that corner to that corner, okay? And so we've done that with all of them, right sides together. So when you sew them, you'll just have what looks like a little kind of a triangle flap, okay? After you've got each one of those sewn, you're ready to just go ahead and trim away, leaving yourself a 1/4 inch seam allowance, right? So we're just putting that first line on our ruler on the line of stitching that you did, so that you leave yourself a 1/4 inch. And we'll just do that with all of them. Once we've got all 4 of these done, we're going to take it over to the ironing board, and we're going to press the seams open. Just the first time I think I've told you to press the seam open. And then we're going to press our whole binding strip. Okay, you ready? Okay, right, okay, so these are all, I've trimmed all of these, okay? We're gonna press each one of these open. Now, it doesn't matter if you go through and press all these first, or if you just kind of do it as you go. But basically, each one of these seams gets pressed open, and the whole binding strip, you're gonna take the 2 raw edges, put them together, and you're just going to iron this, fold it in half, wrong sides together. Okay, so I just work my way along. So you're gonna have a really long strip here that's folded in half. And that's where I pressed my seam open there. You'll be able to feel, you know, because that seam sort of wraps around, there's not a lot of bulk there, and it's just going to make it a lot easier for you to sew. We've pressed our entire binding, and it's now ready to go onto the quilt. So we machine sew it onto the front of the quilt, and then and that's raw edge basically here to raw edge of the quilt, and then this folded edge which is on the inside, eventually we're going to take that to the back and we're going to hand sew that. So when you start sewing here, what you want to do is you want to use your 1/4 inch foot, and you want to leave yourself about 6 inches there, kind of a tail. And it doesn't really matter what side of the quilt that you start on. I would just suggest that you start sort of roughly in the middle of one side, but where you start isn't really that important as much as sort of having a bit of a tail there to start. And we're going to sew this with 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're basically, I'm going to just do a back stitch there and then start sewing. And every once in a while, just stop and line up the edge of your binding with the edge of the front of the quilt. And if you want to pin it, you can. I usually just kind of stop every once in a while and just keep on sewing. And this is pretty much straightforward 1/4 inch sewing all the way along. The only place that it gets a little bit different is when we get to a corner, and we're coming up to a corner here. Okay. As you get to the corner, you want to slow down, because what you're going to do is you're going to stop sewing when you get about 1/4 inch from the edge. And if you're not sure what that is, you can sort of measure it before you get to it and just put a pin there just to remind you to stop. So that's, you want your needle to get to that point. And then just do a back stitch. Take your needle up, your foot up, turn. And then what you're going to do, don't worry about cutting your threads or anything. What we're going to do, we're going to fold your binding so that it goes at a 45-degree angle into the corner. Then I want you to fold it again at the top. That's going to put your binding again so that it's raw edge to raw edge. You're just going to start sewing at the edge there. My thread's stuck. There we go. And then just carry on like you did before, just 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we worked all the way around, and then we came back to here, and then we stopped, leaving ourselves about a 6 inch gap, okay? So we have these two little tails here. And what we're gonna do in order to do the final joint, so we don't have to do any measuring, we have a little trick that we can do here. And we take sort of our tail at the beginning there, and our tail at the end, and we're gonna just kind of make a meet in the middle. We're gonna fold them sort of like that, okay? We're gonna press those. I usually sort of fold them so that there's just a little tiny gap there. Let's press this one first. And then this one. And we're really just pressing them so that we can get a crease that we can see really well. Okay, so that's our two pieces of binding that we folded. Now this was our end piece, okay? What we're gonna do is we're gonna just open it out right sides up. Hopefully we come in really close here. Sorry, that's my dog going crazy. What you can see is this is our crease down the middle, and right here is the crease where I just folded it, okay? Then we're gonna take this one, so you've got essentially an X there. We're gonna take this strip, which is the beginning, and we're gonna open it out wrong side up. And here again, we've got an X, and we're gonna place it so that one X is sitting on top of the other X. So this crease here is going to have the long crease from this piece sitting on top of it, and the short crease is going to sit on that one. And this is where you have to do a little bit of sort of poking and prodding to get them to fit each other, okay? And once I've got them on top of each other, do refer to the drawings in your instructions, because it's probably a little bit easier to see. But basically, that's that long crease there, and I've got the short crease from this one sitting on top of it, and then here I've got the long crease of this one sitting on top of the short crease of this one. And what I've done is I put 2 pins in here, because what I'm going to do, just like when we sewed your binding strips, we essentially had your 2 fabrics so that they were in a kind of a going into a corner. We're essentially doing the same thing here. We're sewing from that corner to that corner, going through the center. Okay, so we're ready to sew now. So remember, that's our cross there. We're going from this point through the center of that cross to the other point. And the pins are just kind of there to hold things together. If they get in your way, just take them out. I think this one's gonna get in my way. I'm just gonna take it out, and I'm just coming for this corner here. Okay. So that's it. Now before we cut anything, we're gonna just do a little visual check here. Make sure that it looks like it's going to fit and that nothing's twisted. And at this point, I usually just cut approximately a 1/4 inch seam allowance with scissors. Finger press this open, and then just close that up. And now what you're ready to do is just finish off your seam. So where we ended here, sorry, just a little technical problem here. Needle unthreaded. Okay, so we're just gonna start roughly where we finished off sewing before. And we're just gonna carry on our 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is the join we just did. And then just overlap your other stitching again. And that's it. It's all sewn to the front. After you've got your binding all stitched to the front of the quilt here, then what we're going to do is we're going to bring the fold to the back of the quilt and stitch that down. Now, normally what I would suggest you do is use a thread that matches your binding. I'm using white here just so that hopefully you can see a little bit better what I'm doing. And I'm just pulling it over. You have sort of this line of stitching on the back, which is from that 1/4 inch seam allowance that you use to sew the binding on. So I usually just use that as a bit of a guide for pulling my my fold back, and I want to make sure that I cover that. And we're just basically about every sort of 1/4 inch-ish, we're just doing a stitch, and just make sure that you're stitching through the quilt, not going through to the other side, and you're just going along every few like I say, about 1/4 inch, and just sew that to the back of the quilt. Okay, so you can probably see my stitches there in white, but if you do that with a with a blue, for instance, for that, you won't see it so much. When you come to a corner, what you're going to do is you're going to be sort of sewing along here. You're going to come to that corner, and you're going to sort of bring this corner down first, and then you're going to fold the other one on top of it, and then you're just going to carry on your way past that corner. So very simple. You'll have a nice pretty miter on both the front and the back of each of your 4 corners. So hopefully that's going to help you all with putting your binding on. If you have any questions, you know how to reach me.